how Bitcoin thrived through China's bans and ultimately became even stronger. Today, I'm going to talk about how Bitcoin is able to withstand an attack from even the strongest of countries and still survive, and what lessons China's attack on Bitcoin leaves for Bitcoiners around the world, like you, me, and the people around us. Stick around because we're going to be going through how they attacked from the protocol level, how it survived there, the regulatory level, how it survived there, the communications level and influencer level, and how it survived there, and what lessons it leaves for all of us. Stay tuned. How Bitcoin thrived through China's bans and became much stronger. This was written by my good friend Roger Huang, author of Would Mao Hold Bitcoin. Highly recommend him. Follow him on Twitter. Highly recommend buying his book. Knows a bunch about a bunch. So yeah, this was a fascinating story. I found this really interesting because, for starters, it toys around with how China and the Chinese Communist Party tried to defeat Bitcoin or block Bitcoin, and how each of those attempts were defeated, rejected, and both Bitcoin ultimately came out stronger. I think that this gives us a really interesting light in how authoritarian governments are thinking about this kind of stuff, why they're interested, why they're not, and what we can sort of do to create those safeguards for when our own country's rulers, if they ever come, I know that a lot of you like to get all handsy and pansy and think about how all presidents and all government and all state actors are just authoritarians in the closet or outside the closet, and they're waiting to clamp down on your individual freedoms and personal liberties. I'm not sure that's so, but even so, interesting stuff here. By the way, have you subscribed? Do you want to subscribe? Can you subscribe? Just below there. It'll take a second. Cheers. Let's get into it. Many have written about the number of bans China has implemented on Bitcoin. It was an early joke that Bitcoin had banned it so many times. How Bitcoin escaped these bans and grew even more vital is a lesson about how to build decentralized technology that is resilient to even the most potent attackers, and is a focus of my book on Bitcoin plus China. Again, highly recommend Would Mao Hold Bitcoin. Interesting stuff. So how does China control and censor its internet? For those of you that are listening, if you've never heard, China has this thing called China's Great Firewall, which is essentially IP blocking or ways to censor the internet, both from information getting in as well as information getting out. So it's sort of a two-way street. And it's a play on words from the Great Wall of China, which I visited many a year ago, and very, very impressive, to say the least. I don't think impressive really makes it, but still. So China's Great Firewall is based on IP blocking rather than protocol level blocking. So that's essentially an IP, so from the server that you connect and you get into. China is also incredibly aggressive in requesting Apple to do App Store takedowns, which is interesting. So in 2022, for example, China was responsible for more than 97% of apps taken down by Apple in different countries. I wondered why. I looked it up. I'm not entirely sure why Apple would comply so much. I guess the power of making money in China is just so much bigger. I wonder if it has anything to do with them building their phones there. Questions? And then finally, within the country, law enforcement has access to physical surveillance and registered IDs of everybody in China who purchased this phone. Still, with all of this and multiple regulatory notices and attempts to ban Bitcoin, China was not able to dent Bitcoin itself, which is humming at a much better price level and activity level than the level of bans implemented by China. Shots fired, Roger. Shots fired. So here we're going to go into the vectors for blocking Bitcoin and how each was defeated. So the first one is banking and communications. China has immense control over the banking system and app ecosystem within the country itself. Different conversations on Chinese social media, so that's Weibo, Weijing, which Roger says is used disproportionately, and Xiaohongshu. I hope I pronounced that right. Roger, you're probably squirming in your chair right now because I know you're an avid listener. I tried my best. But beyond that, China started its attack on Bitcoin by banning the banking system from holding it. However, this gets straight to Bitcoin's utility. Unlike a payment rail controlled by a company like PayPal that requires a static ID and access to banking to work, Bitcoin does not. I do find it really interesting that Roger lets through throughout this article that this isn't necessarily like China bans it, but China disapproves of it. That's a really interesting concept in my eyes. So they're the government and they're signaling disapproval towards using this, holding this, applying this. I wonder if that's a very Asian thing. I've seen a lot of Asian stand-up comics and comedies and have a bunch of stand-up friends, Asian friends who talk a lot about disapproval from family or from parents and that sort of stuff. I wonder if there's a sort of connection to that. But yeah, I did find that super interesting. So it's not just like I'm banning you, but I'm also disapproving you. I'm looking down on you in a certain way, being like, man, I thought you were better than this. Previously, so before 2013, there seemed to be some openness to allowing people to participate in Bitcoin. But with this regulatory notice, China started down a path of bans. The next easiest attack vector is to use the Chinese party state's control of the communications rails. So by banning specific hashtags and key accounts, the Chinese party state has some control over the Chinese internet. It can easily suspend certain key accounts. To be honest, that happens around the world anyways. We've seen that on Twitter, we've seen that on Facebook, Instagram, all that sort of stuff. I think today Nostr and Rumble are among the freest, you can call them. It can easily suspend even particular hashtags in certain language, which China deployed multiple times to stifle Bitcoin. This power is deployed around the Tiananmen Square massacre that happened on June 4th, for example, and has led to multiple cat and mouse chases that have led different ways of describing Tiananmen on the Chinese internet. May 35th, for example. Not entirely sure that reference. But yeah, Bitcoin was built precisely resistant to these layers of attack. That's because Bitcoin will keep pushing blocks regardless of the internet and media activity surrounding it. So it doesn't matter if you hate it and you tear down every single YouTube channel that talks about Bitcoin, it's still going to work. It's still going to allow for transactions to happen. It's still going to allow people to access the software and the protocol, to download an app and to start using it. Because Bitcoin was always built to resist banking system-based attacks. However, and this is an important point, the importance of establishing native language ecosystems and rails for onboarding and explanation remains. So mainland China and simplified Chinese might be among the most significant clusters, but examples abound from Farsi to the Russian language. I see this in Spanish a lot. We have a lot more channels nowadays in Spanish than before, but still a lot of the terms are natively in English. A lot of the channels people talk about are native in English. I remember I went to a few fucking conferences in El Salvador that were all English. And I understand that there are English speaking exposers and exposés, but then where are the locals? Where are the Chileans? Where are the Mexicans? Where are the Spanish people? Where are the Colombians? Like, what the fuck? That was bizarre. But like he says, any country that controls a large amount of the discussion in one language online can bend the discourse there. Yet, it's clear that people are looking for information outside of their countries, and in the case of China specifically, a history of many people jumping the Great Firewall. I like that analogy, thinking of a guy jumping over when it's actually kind of jumping through, isn't it? Can help people get the documentation they need. GitHub, I'd like to point out, is also surprisingly resilient as a hub. There are 551 results for Bitcoin Mandarin symbols. The next layer of attack is exchanges. This is an obvious layer of attack. For those of you that don't know, centralized exchanges, on-ramps and off-ramps, as they're commonly known, the way that most people access their Bitcoin or their cryptocurrency. It's a very obvious way to chokehold it because you have companies, you have legal structures, you have people to go after. People need to KYC, so know your customer. You need to give up your ID, and that gives another main way for people to go after you, whether that's for tax implications, whether that's for simply buying it, whether that's for knowing where you live. Because like you said, you've got China, who or the Communist Party that knows IDs, knows where people live. It's super totalitarian, isn't it? So, yeah, interesting. Bitcoin exchanges are a double-edged sword. Most people will use exchanges to transact, and some will hold Bitcoin there. This helps grow access to Bitcoin among different countries as exchanges serve as rapid on-ramps and off-ramps. China asked many, that's nice, they asked, can you, can you? Many exchanges that service Chinese clients to shut down and went after any foreign exchanges making yuan trades trying to sell all cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin to Chinese. How Bitcoin or why Bitcoin thrived through this attack? Shitcoins tethered to Bitcoin, USDC to Bitcoin, Ethereum to Bitcoin, all that sort of stuff. It sounds, my maxi mates out there, that there might be a use after all for shitcoins and the shitcoin industrial complex.
My time has come.
Oh my God. Don't shoot. Just saying. The next one is interesting. Arrests. There have been multiple arrests for trading Bitcoin or USDT Tether, a stable coin pegged 1-to-1 with the US dollar, or in other cases, there are the euro, stuff like that. A friend of mine, actually, parenthesis, built Dinix. In 2014, he created a stable coin called Dinix, which was pegged to the Chilean peso. As you can understand, I don't know why I said peso like that. Anyways, moving on. As you can expect, didn't do very well, but that's still pretty fucking cool. Shout out to Camilo for doing that. You know who you are. You know where you are. There have been multiple arrests for trading Bitcoin or USDT, even in peer-to-peer trade. Traders and owners of OTC trading desks have been arrested for making an example to discourage physical trade. However, some persist in doing this trade. For one, it's lucrative, and two, it takes time to catch. I thought of this when I was reading through it. It's kind of like poaching. So, very lucrative. There's obviously the terrifying and terrible, horrendous side of killing animals. But yeah, it's lucrative, and it's super hard to catch poachers. And as far as I know, a lot of the poaching goes through, I don't know if China per se, but Asia. Why Bitcoin thrived through this attack? Individual arrests don't matter for the system's incentives inherent. However, Bitcoiners should be aware about nation-state level threats, especially nation-states that might be more pointed about combining KYC data with individuals. This is why KYC is dangerous. And there's people who are always talking about Bitcoin needs more privacy. You need to be more private about Bitcoin. There might come the day where they come after you, they arrest you, all that sort of stuff. Keep that in mind. Then we've got the mining ban. China's advantage in hardware manufacturing made it an obvious place to create specialized chips that went into ASICs. ASICs are specialized computers that have one task and one task only, which is mining Bitcoin. If you ever hear it, it's really interesting. I remember watching a video a few years back of somebody who's like had a miner at their house from 2013, and then there was light, and he has the machines on, and he goes, this is the sound of money. And I just found it really interesting because you've got these like machines that are essentially, yeah, creating money. Anyways, a mining ban quickly disrupted Bitcoin's hash rate as a province after province banned Bitcoin mining. One thing is that it doesn't appear that China is using electricity usage tracking to hunt down people with miners, though they are seizing miners in Chinese physical territory. I know that Nick Carter has said a few things that this is not only because of the Chinese Communist Party's disapproval of Bitcoin itself, but it also has something to do with a switch over from carbon-based electrical grid or energy grid into a more renewable one. So keep that in mind. Why did Bitcoin thrive through this attack? Miners are physically mobile. You can take the devices, plug them in. All you need is an electricity, a socket, or some sort of energy source, and internet. Bitcoin is uniquely positioned to withstand this attack vector because you can move Bitcoin miners across borders easily and set up shop the very next day. I will say, though, I don't think it's that easy. If you look at the Bitcoin mining hash rate after China banned it, it plummeted, I think, something like 50%. It took several months to get back up. That it got back up, it did get back up. It wasn't instantly like the very next day, although in theory that can happen. But if you've got industrial scale farms or you've got a bunch of different devices, I don't think it's that easy. It's just picking them up and moving them over to the nearest region because China's pretty fucking big and a lot of this stuff happened interiorly. So while the theory might say one thing, I think in the practice it might be different. Even so, China managed to withhold it. Protocol bans. China has banned Tor from a protocol level for some years. So Tor is the onion router. Essentially, when you jump online, what your browser, what your computer does, it requests a server or a host to send you the information that it has. What Tor does, the onion router, is kind of like an onion, so a bunch of layers. So what you do is you ask the next one, you connect to, you ask a host or a server or a website for the information. But instead of going straight there, it goes through several other servers and IPs to get there. And all you know is the one before you and not the one after. So it can take like 6 or 7 hops, and that protects your privacy. So that's what you do. It's a way to encrypt traffic, essentially. So China has banned Tor. It's not illegal to own it, Bitcoin, though it can be used in China as a currency. Here, it doesn't necessarily say that China did this at the protocol level, except for the fact that you need to, or that a lot of people were using Tor to access Bitcoin related websites, Bitcoin related stuff, using VPNs and reachable Bitcoin nodes. So these special computers that are checking for maintaining the network, making sure blocks are correct. However, 2 areas make Bitcoin more resilient here. One, there's a global reach of Bitcoin nodes and applications. It's doubtful that nation states will coordinate all at once to take all nodes offline. So somebody within China can always use a method to broadcast transactions to Bitcoin networks, whether through a foreign app or in a foreign land. And then number 2, Bitcoin's scale and its many uses help here too. Unlike Tor, which hides web traffic, someone can use Bitcoin to transmit financial value. For example, more people run Bitcoin nodes than Tor relays, which gives the system more resiliency. And there are a variety of wallet and client apps that can be used to spend and receive Bitcoin, whereas there are only a few options to browse using Tor. Interesting. This isn't to say that Tor is a bad tool or not to be used or not used, but it is to say that Bitcoin has a unique scale and value proposition that protects it even against the most hardened state adversaries. Because it doesn't get much tougher than China, does it? You have China, I suppose, the US, I suppose, and North Korea, I suppose, Russia, I suppose. So yeah. What happens after the bans and why Bitcoin is thriving? In the immediate aftermath of the mining ban, the price swayed a bit, but only slightly. The hash rate also decreased, but quickly increased back again from 2022 to 2023, steadily doubled to highs not seen before the mining ban. Bitcoin quickly took the blow, and people who had mining machines in China moved to different directions. Bitcoin was fundamentally able to weather the blow because it was built to be resilient and anti-fragile in the first place. Mandarin resources and communities oriented around Bitcoin, whose price discovery mechanism was an investment that could hedge against being stuck in the Chinese system and a store of value superior to Chinese equity and real estate markets, capital flight, and all that jazz. Let's get to the end of it, shall we? There are a few principles Bitcoiners can take from Bitcoin's interaction with China. Number 1, the more self-custody, so the more you take control of your keys, get your Bitcoin off exchanges or using centralized apps, and diversified from exchanges, the Bitcoin economy is, the stronger it is to nation-state attack. Number 2, even in extreme cases, the right to Bitcoin ownership can still be preserved. And if that's the case, eventually a government can move in that direction, though it will prefer to use it as a financial tool for its markets. And number 3, communication and financial freedom go hand in hand. Having independent media in places where one can express themselves can be a canary in the coal mine as to how one can transact, and the two intersect. Fucking billions. What do you think? Subscribe, give us your like, give us a comment. But what do you think? Do you think China is a canary in the coal mine of what might happen around the world? Are you worried of your country going down the Chinese routes? Do you like Chinese food and culture and the Chinese New Year and the Chinese horoscope? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, shout out and choose your own news.